Welcome to Wake, a cold reading of James Joyce's Finnegan's Wake, just to hear it out loud. Join Toby Malone and TJ Young, along with some special friends, as we puzzle our way through what we once thought was an unreadable book to produce a surprisingly listenable podcast. It is Wednesday, August 14th, 2024. It has been 89 days since we've started reading, with 216 pages complete of 628, meaning we have 412 pages left to go and a 34.39% and one whole book of the way through Finnegan's Wake. Welcome to episode 16 of Wake, the podcast which is way further on than anyone thought it would go, and that includes you, dear listener. No one really thought we'd get this far, fulfilling a long-held bucket list item, reading James Joyce's Finnegan's Wake out loud just once. I am your host, Toby Malone, joined once more by my fellow completist, my co-host, TJ Young. Hi, TJ.
Oh, hello. I have a quick question for you.
Yes, of course.
How's the weather in Toronto?
The weather has turned nice. It's been pretty good the last couple of days. When I got home from Australia, I was very unhappy because the weather in the middle of winter in Australia was nicer than it was here in the middle of summer in Toronto, and I felt really cheated. And I just missed a whole heat wave in Toronto, and we got back here and it was raining and grey, and now it's in Celsius terms, it's 29 degrees, which is pretty nice and sunny. So I'm pretty happy. What about there in Pittsburgh?
Same. I feel like fall has come early for some reason. Like it's getting cool at night, cool enough to where I can just sleep with the windows open. But like during the day, I'm like this. I could be outside and not die. I don't know what's happening, and I understand that climate change is weird and messing with everything. But right now, I'm very pleased that it is.
Well, particularly in preparing for the new fall semester, feeling like fall is already here while you're prepping for fall really feels like helpful. A real cheat. It's helpful. I guess it helps you get into that fall mode, but it also that's taking away that last couple of weeks of summer. You want it to be hot up until Labor Day so that you can really to wring the most out of it.
Very true. I mean, I will say this though: the fact that it is like this right now, that it is nice and cool, does make me feel like I can take full advantage of it and not, be utterly dehydrated. So like I'm going to a pool party this weekend and I'm like, this is perfect. It's not like I have to be in the pool or else I'm going to die, but it's like, it's warm enough to where, Yeah,
it's always a weird thing when we go away, because we go away for 3 or 4 weeks during the summer every couple of years. And so we feel like we miss summer, but then we go back to Australia and we still go to the beach. We still swim in the ocean, still all that kind of stuff, even though all the Australians that we meet think we're crazy because for them it's
like it's winter. Yeah,
exactly. They're all in their hoodies and their sweatpants and everything, and we're running around on the beach. But it means you get more beach. So, this is an unusual episode of Wake. There's no reading this week. We decided that since we finished book 1, we thought we would have a little bonus episode. We're still calling it episode 16 just because we like to pile up the stats. But we wanted to have a brief discussion on getting to the end of book 1 and what we discovered along the way.
And we discussed if this should happen, and we're like, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel as though there's a real temptation to rush and to say, we said all the words. Like, it goes back to that analogy I used in the first episode, I think, or the 0 episode, where I said it's kind of like going into an art gallery, and as long as you walk past the art, you've seen the art, which really isn't how you're supposed to consume art. And the same thing here with us saying every word of Finnegan's Wake. Does that mean we've read it? No, not really. I mean, in many ways. And I think Joyce was very much about the rereading of this book. I do say always in the top of this podcast that we're going to read this book once, and that is true. We're not going to reread Finnegan's Wake. This is a first read for us, maybe a last one, but I feel as though this is a book that you want to come back and revisit from time to time.
Yeah, I mean, if anything, I'm glad that we're going through and circling things and highlighting things just to be like, what? Like, there's a cool phrase, there's a cool turn, what was it about this passage? What that really spoke to me, and I think that it's almost like whenever you watch a clip of your favorite television show, you're like, yeah, this episode wasn't that great, but this chunk, this was a really good joke.
Yeah.
So I'm going to, you know what I mean? Or like, this movie wasn't that fantastic, but I can quote 15 things from it that really
Right.
stuck with me.
Absolutely. And I always think, I was just looking at the cover of the Penguin Modern Classics edition that we have, and there is a very interesting design on the front of some clouds, and it could be a dreamscape or something, and then there's text overlaid, and I always think it's kind of interesting that whenever you see a design like this with Finnegan's Wake, nearly always the designer has chosen just to use the first page of the first chapter. You can see here, this is the one. And mostly it's because it features the first thunder word. And so we have the first thunder word that's right in the middle of the cover of the first page, because that's the first time anyone sees something like that. And that's kind of crazy. And it sort of shows you a lot of people are just like, well, I got as far as the first page and I saw a crazy thing, so I stuck it into my design, moving on. But I would love to see one of these designs where someone pulls an interesting image from page 342. I don't know if it's going to happen, which is why on our Instagram page, please follow us on Instagram at wake.pod. I try to advertise every week's episode by photographing some of those words that we circle, some of those things that are interesting, and put and make that our Instagram post, which I quite enjoy doing every week.
I feel like this cover design, now that you pointed out, feels very much like a teaser for the rest of the book, where it's like, you think that these words are crazy, just you wait.
Yeah. The first page almost feels very straightforward now. Looking back, remembering in chapter 1.1, which is called Finnegan's Wake with the apostrophe, and the stories of Tim Finnegan falling off the roof, and also hearing about Kate Strong and her music room, it's almost nostalgic for the simplicity of how it layers us in, but the reality being that it gets bananas later on, and I don't even know if we've really even started with the difficulty that the later chapters are going to bring us.
Yeah, you and I have both looked forward, not in reading it, but just in being like, what else does this book have kind of for us? And I know we're going to talk about it beforehand, but there's diagrams and there's sketches, and I'm like, how? What? How?
Yeah.
But I think that you're right that in the beginning, there's this like, I have to constantly remind myself that there's like a frame story here, and it feels very much like a Grand Budapest Hotel in that way, where it's not until the end of the movie that you're like, oh yeah, we're watching someone read a book about someone who's reading a book about right.
Yeah. And that frame helps keep us on something of a track where we continue to come back to this family. In all 8 of the chapters we've read so far, each of them have been hugely intertwined around these 5 people, HCE, ALP, Shem, Shaun, and Izzy. So and then I'm sure that's supposed to keep us on some kind of track, because I think if Joyce goes off on his, flights of fancy, I'm not sure that he would be able to keep it on track without that thematic guide.
Yeah, at the end of the day, it's like, oh yeah, don't forget that we're still talking about this family, these people.
Yeah, and then the really interesting thing that Joyce does is by saying, hey, here is a man who lives in Dublin called Humphrey Chimpton Earwicker, who is a person who lives in Dublin, but also he represents all of humanity. Plus also he represents all of the Irish legends and myths. And plus he also represents, so it's sort of really, HC kind of becomes synecdoche for everything. And then same with ALP. ALP is all of the rivers. And each of these characters you could read in a very straightforward manner. And I feel as though the stage production, the stage adaptation probably is really hewing to that idea of we're worrying about the human within this. But I'm not sure how you would go about trying to represent the multitudes.
Yeah, I also wonder, I'm thinking about a stage adaptation of this, and I am constantly wondering, how do you capture voice in this because voice is shifting all the time.
Right.
And because a multitude of what we learn is from other people who aren't these individuals.
Right.
You know?
Yes.
And so how can I give HCE voice for the first big chunk of the book is just other people talking about HCE.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, and obviously, it just makes me think of Beckett, and how Godot is very much a character in Waiting for Godot, but he never appears. And I mean, and that's really oversimplifying what you just said, but I feel as though, in terms of how we would adapt it, we played last week's episode a excerpt of Joyce reading from the Analytica chapter, and it was a very short chapter, so we didn't really get much of his personality in it. And I also get the sense that Joyce isn't an actor, so he's not. He was a beautiful singer, but I don't think he was a performer. So in terms of how he would play all these different roles, you wish that you had a sense of the voices that Joyce hears in his head when he's going back and forth between these guys, Poolbeg, and these really specific characters. Some of which he writes phonetically, and so you sort of start drifting into this real Irish kind of accent. But then in others, it's a conversation going back and forth, and if you're not careful, you can just say them all in one voice, and then you lose it. Which is why, like I say, us reading it once through probably isn't getting the sense of what Joyce was trying to do. But again, we never promised that. So
yeah, and in an adaptation of this, I'm like, I see a world where Festy King has his own play.
Sure, yeah.
Or it's just the story of Festy King, which I just think that would just be a fun little thing, and that with these tangents and with even though they all tie back into HC, I'm constantly thinking about the depth of these side characters. And the depth of there was that passage, and I'm going to try to find it, but I'm flipping through 200 pages to find it. Is that passage of like this older man who just wants someone to love him so that way they can watch the stars together. I'm like, that whole trajectory of a relationship and the desire of one person for another is enough to fill in, an episode of television or and the way that he shoves it in, and then you stumble into these stories and you stumble out of them, is something that I'm finding that I'm learning to appreciate. It was infuriating at first, not gonna lie. But I think part of that is the result of us dealing with contemporary editing practices.
Yes.
When it comes to storytelling,
Yeah, it's interesting. Sometimes it feels like watching life from a moving train. And you see glimpses, but you don't get the whole story. And then the thing that comes immediately to mind is Natasha, Pierre, and the Great Comet of 1812.
Yeah. And
you could go into that musical with absolutely no knowledge of War and Peace. And in fact, unless you read the program, I mean, the first track from that is very much expository to try to make sure we understand all these relationships and the fact that the crazy Russian naming conventions and things. But that's a fascinating concept of taking an excerpt, and not even a long excerpt, like as an adapted. Like it would be kind of like when you adapted the Three Musketeers and you only took that section when they're in the war and they go and have a tea party, like closer to the enemy, right?
Which is a viable thing to do.
And you could, but making that the entire play and saying, okay, I'm not going to adapt the Three Musketeers. I'm going to adapt one scene from the Three Musketeers where these idiots went and did this stupid thing and nearly died just to prove that they could. And you really feel like you say, the idea of a play about Festy King could totally exist, or the play about the old man and the young women in the park could be a really interesting 30-minute play or a 60-minute play or something like that. And I mean, now my dramaturg's brain is sparking, and I'm like, oh man, before the end of this reading of this book, we need to have adapted one of these tiny episodes, not even a chapter, but just an episode of an episode, like bits and pieces, and then call it the whatever we call it, Ballad of Festy King, and then and figure out what it would be feeling like to adapt just a corner of Finnegan's Wake.
Right.
Not trying to do the whole thing, which is what Craig Walker did, where he adapted the entire thing, and they make a real effort to speak the first thunder word in the first minute of the play, and that's fine. But what does that thunder word do for the audience aside from showing them, look, there's going to be crazy stuff in this book, just like the designers of this edition do?
Right. Yeah. Throughout all of it, I think the thing that has been the most difficult of book one, and I think also the most rewarding, is that, we've talked several times about how this book forces us to change the way that we read and comprehend.
Mm-hmm.
And that doesn't stop us from wanting to tie ourselves to characters, to emotional moments, to these sort of flag posts that we can point back to and say, okay, I kind of get what you're doing here.
Mm-hmm.
Which, like you said, I think does lend itself to multiple readings. But in this pass through this novel currently, because we are not taking the time that I think either one of us would if we were just reading it silently by ourselves,
right,
by going back and being like, I'm going to reread this page until I can kind of track what's happening, right? And do the thing that you and I are both want to do, which is let me Google this phrase to figure out exactly what it means. The number of times I read a novel with my phone next to me, be like, what's the etymology of this word?
Right.
Is ridiculous. But it's this feels the most dreamscapey of dreamscapey books that I've ever read. And I feel like I'm starting to see the way that authors try to mimic this and what they feel is a more comprehensible style that I think at the end just kind of leaves things kind of flat.
Yeah.
Where you're like, oh, it's weird. But the question always becomes, it's weird to what end? Most books that I read that exist in this weird dream space, I'm like, none of that was necessary. You're really just telling this really simple story that exists within chapters 7 through 14. You know what I mean? But this feels like the complexity of the world that he's building is necessary for those emotional moments to have resonance.
Right. And I feel as though Joyce is asking us to trust him because there's no one Joyce trusts more than Joyce. And I think he's saying, just trust me, this is what this is. And we've talked a lot in the past about whether or not Joyce would be allowed to publish this now. I don't think there's an editor in the world who would stand behind this and say, no, this has to come out. Like, I feel as though you would have editors who would be championing a version of this that gives us a little payoff. Like, I don't know if you know the book, The Magus by John Fowles, which was a big, I think it was published in the 70s or it was a big deal in the 70s. Anyway, it was a book that was always around at my parents' house. And he published, and it's a mystery story about a man who goes to an island and there's all this crazy kind of pagan ritual stuff going on there, and he's investigating about what's going on. But there was all these kind of disappearing magic things, all this stuff that goes on. And in the first version of the Magus, Fowles didn't explain how it worked. He didn't explain, like, people were just popping up and disappearing. And people read it and lost their minds. Like, what do you mean? Where's the logic? This doesn't make sense. And so his publisher forced him to write to adapt or to add sections, which basically explained the mystery so that people weren't confused anymore. And now that's the only version you can get. So if you want to get version 1, you have to go and find it in a secondhand bookstore or somewhere. And the fact that people were so scared of the mystery, of the fact that, oh, I'm not going to tell you how this works. You're just going to have to trust me that it happened and that the world is mysterious sometimes. Whereas the readers were like, no, tell me. And I believe it was the Americans who who basically said, we don't accept that you're not going to tell us the answer. The British were like, all right, cool. And so my parents used to always talk about this this book being so revolutionary because people didn't know how things were happening. And I remember loving the book when I read the book, and my dad said, which version did you read? And I said, I don't know, whatever this one is. He says, oh, that's the one that has all of that tells
answers.
You how it happens, where the trapdoors were and all that stuff. And I feel as though Joyce, the thing I love most about this is Joyce never says to us, oh, you're confused, let me catch you up.
Right.
And that's such a gift, because I don't think anything like that could exist now.
Not in literature form. No, that's not in literature form. That's not some sort of like catchy, let me sell this as a puzzle for you to like I recommended a book to you. I can't remember the name.
Cain's
of it.
Jawbone, yeah.
Yeah, where it's like all the pages are out of order and you're supposed to tear all the pages out and figure out the order of it.
And when you sent me that recommendation, I immediately bought it. And so I have Cain's Jawbone, and I had it in a period. It was a week when my wife was out of town, so I had it here with my kids, and I was showing them. I had it on the table, and everyone would pick it up every now and then and flip through, and we were all trying to figure out what page one was, so we could maybe start. Yeah. And yeah, the idea where all the pages are out of order and there's a murder mystery, and so in order to solve the murder mystery, you have to put the pages back in order. I mean, it's such a brilliant, incredible idea, and one that we quickly gave up on and put on the shelf. But yeah. I mean, sometimes the puzzle is the point.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I think that the only place where this sort of deep experimentation lives are in realistically like neo jazz, which you're like, where's the melody? Where's the counterpoint? What's the tempo? Where is this living? And art films. When I tell you, and I know that this is based on the book and people are going to lambast me in the comments, and I'm totally fine with that. But when I saw I'm thinking about ending things, I was like, I don't know how to watch a movie because I have no idea what happened, But
well, I have to admit that I love Charlie Kaufman. Love. Adaptation is in my top 3 movies of all time.
Oh, yeah.
But I never braved I'm thinking of ending things because I looked at it and went, I don't know if I have the fortitude right now to take this on, and so I never saw it, and so I really should. But
I watched it after I watched Tenet, and Tenet I can't understand because of different reasons. The sound mixing is awful, but I was like, I'm going to watch this movie because I also love adaptation. I was like, I'm going to watch this movie, and this is going to be great. And I was like, what? I was like, I forgot how to watch films because my brain is not comprehending. But it also feels like the first time I watched Mulholland Drive. I was like, what?
Or Twin Peaks.
Yeah, but we give this sort of liberty to filmmakers, but we don't allow people to do the same thing in novels.
But even
anymore.
Something like Twin Peaks, David Lynch was allowed to have his way for a while. But it was a huge smash hit on commercial television. But then people started being like, okay, but who is the killer? Tell us. If we follow along and add up all the clues, then we'll get a payoff at the end. And Lynch was like, oh, I don't know, man. Until they finally, they started to commercialize it a little bit. And the same thing with Lost, where the creators of Lost, we were like,
oh, so
you know the answer. Yeah, you know the answer, right? And like, no. We're just solving. We're coming up with the new plot points every week. So I feel like Joyce is so far ahead of his time in so many ways. Like writing something like this, which I think a lot of people, including his wife, were kind of frustrated that he wasn't commercializing his genius. Where they were like, just write a nice story and you'll make $1 million, man. What are you doing? And he just couldn't do that. And speaking of. It reminds me very much of our very good friend. Hi, Neil. I know you're listening. But it's just like Neil. Neil writes the most beautiful, complex, difficult plays, which are very difficult to sell to commercial theatre companies because they're so difficult. And a lot of people have said to Neil, hey, man, why don't you just write a goofy comedy? And Neil says, no, thank you. That is not art to me. And I love him for it. I think it's fantastic. So, So Neil, yes, I'm comparing you to James Joyce. You're welcome.
It's funny because whenever my students are all like, I want to play, and I'm like, I know, got it. And I always hand them Neil's play. And you
Yeah.
know what the thing is? They are always mystified by it and they love it.
Yeah.
But when I tell you that, they're like, I don't know what to do with it. And I'm like, great, figure that out. But, you know, they don't want to do that.
Yeah, I mean, people want something hard until it's too hard. And that's why Finnegan's Wake is still being published, because it's not exactly Cain's Jawbone, but it's this puzzle. And, you know, I was in a bookshop in Australia a couple of weeks ago, and I came to the classics section, and there were three editions of Dubliners, one edition of Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man, 4 editions of Ulysses, and no editions of Finnegan's Wake. And I got a message from one of my former students today, Ryan Benson Smith, one of my beloved former students, and they are just starting their journey of listening to Wake. And so they texted me and said, hey, I can't find a copy of Finnegan's Wake in any. So they went to this Strand in New York City this morning and found 11 different editions of Ulysses, but no Finnegan's Wake.
That's crazy.
It's crazy. And so then they went next door to an antiquarian bookstore where the guy, apparently they said to the bookshop owner, hey, I need a copy of Finnegan's Wake. The owner's eyes went wide. And then they went, oh, well, I have these. And they had $300 first editions available. So Ryan decided to continue on their way, and we'll find a secondhand edition somewhere. But it's amazing the fact that Finnegan's Wake is hard to track down. You don't see it just on a shelf in a bookstore, because what's the turnover on a book like that?
I mean, we talked about how it's a book that a lot of people own, but none of them have read,
Mm-hmm.
and so, you know, it reminds me of like this is going to be a really bad comparison, so I do apologize. But it's like Angels and Demons. Everyone bought Angels and Demons. And
right.
I know so many people who just had it, and I was like, have you read it yet? They're like, no. But, you know, nobody carries Angels and Demons anymore. But I will say that every time I say I'm reading Finnegan's Wake, everyone's like, really? The number of people who have been like, I own a copy, but I haven't opened it yet.
Yeah.
Has been a lot more than people who have been like, I haven't heard of it.
Yeah.
Which the people I talk to, who they've all heard of Finnegan's Wake. So.
Right. Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's the fact that we were a third of the way through and we managed to slog our way through 8 chapters. And it wasn't even a slog. I think when we first started, we played with this idea that it was an unreadable book. And Neil objected to unreadable, and we kind of agreed with him, because we went, yeah, it is really readable. It's so fun to read, and there's so many interesting turns of phrases and so many curious ways in, and it's just having worked in the professional writing industry for so long, the pure wonder of what was going on inside of that man's brain as he created this, and then created it in such an obtuse way to make it essentially impenetrable unless you really worked at it, is incredible. It's very subversive. It feels very much like the Dadaists were in Joyce's head of what they were trying to do. And writing this book starting in 1922, the world is recovering from World War One, and then Joyce is not only writing his book, but he's going through all this traumatic stuff with his family and his daughter's mental health, and going back and forth, feeling like he's in exile from Ireland, and then seeing the rise of Nazis in Europe, going through the Great Depression, all of this stuff, and while also defending Ulysses, while also trying to write Finnegan's Wake, or Work in Progress, and then leading all the way up to the Second World War. The absurdists who were writing very much about the idea of, well, everything is pointless, the world is madness. Guys like Ionesco and Beckett and people like that. You really feel the tendrils throughout this of what this is doing.
Yeah, I think that we don't give Dadaists enough of their credit.
Mm-hmm.
I will admit, in grad school, the idea of Dada drove me absolutely insane, and I was like, "Why? Why are we doing this?" But then, TikTok is just Dada. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
shows like
I
uh,
think you should leave.
Dada, right?
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
and then there's a cartoon on Netflix called That Midnight Gospel.
Right.
It's the most Dada beautiful, and it reminds me of like the animation feels almost Joycean
Mm-hmm.
because it's completely incongruent with the audio that's happening most of the time.
Right.
And so it is this dissonance where you are looking for meaning now, and because it's a Netflix project, and at some point in time they have to have some level of commercial success. Those things start to kind of coalesce and become more congruent. But I remember the first two episodes, it gave me the same feeling of reading this, of being like, I have no idea what I'm experiencing,
Mm-hmm.
but all I know is that it's bringing me joy and like anger and frustration at the same time, of like wonder and um, being able to experience art that pushes against you in that way. I
Yes.
think is really great, because right now we pick up a novel, even by those authors that we love, and we're like, by the end of chapter 3 we will know what the protagonist wants or
Right.
needs. And
Mm-hmm.
a lot of that is because of editing, but even if you are an author that does a weird thing with a book, right, you are then expected to do a weird thing with a book. And I'm thinking about the murder mystery book, um, where I can only imagine that, because the puzzle is find where page 1 is, how much are you actually trying to connect with the characters
Right.
in that process, because your brain's working on a completely different wavelength, while this is like, no, I do want you to connect with these characters, and there's a reason why I'm giving you um, everyone else's point of view of them, so that way eventually, hopefully, maybe, who knows, maybe this is me getting ahead of myself, but so that way we can make our own conclusions about HCE. And
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. It's really there. He's really laying a lot of the responsibility on us, but it's also this kind of environment where you're also not expected to get it, and so if you get it, then cool. But if you
great.
don't, then cool. And both things are right, because it just made me think of that quotation we used in the first episode, where we talked about one of the reasons when Joyce was asked, or he wrote in a letter about why Finnegan's Wake, or what would become Finnegan's Wake, was being written in that way, and he said that he said he was writing about the dreams. One great part of every human existence is passed in a state which, and this is the important part, which cannot be rendered sensible by the use of
Mm-hmm.
wide awake language, cut and dry grammar, and go ahead plot. So the fact that he's not only talking about language, so the words that are being used, but also the grammar and also the plot, he's making those a single whole. And if you have any one of those things that makes sense, then we can forgive the other things. Whereas the fact that you can't have a go-ahead plot, you can't have cut and dry grammar, you can't have wide awake language. Whereas you think about any kind of media that you see where dreams are represented, then
Mm-hmm.
there's nearly always one of those things: wide awake language, cut and dry grammar, go ahead plot. Even like when we talked about Twin Peaks, you have the people talking backwards,
Yeah.
and that and so the language has been run backwards through the recorder, and so if you play it on reverse, then you can understand the thing. But then we can also recognize the characters, and the characters are interacting with one another in this sort of sense of go ahead plot. But Joyce doesn't want any of that. So I think it's fascinating, because in just about any rendition of a dream, like I just think about, for example, like Buffy. Buffy often wakes up from a dream having seen a premonition of what's going to happen, but it's always very
Literal.
relatable. It may be there's something in there that she needs to know, but she never wakes up and says, I don't know what that meant. She knows exactly what it means, and she wakes up and goes and solves the problem. In this, Joyce is completely unconcerned over the fact that if the plot. Oh yeah, the plot. You like that plot of HCE being accused of spying on girls in the park. You like that plot where I'm going to go off on this other tangent, and we're not even going to talk to him, and there's going to be a trial, and we're going to be singing, and there's going to be all these different kinds of things. Now we're going to talk about a letter that was found in a midden heap by a chicken, and like all of this crazy stuff that's going on. The plot is irrelevant, and the plot has moved. It's either moved so far forward that there's no point in following it anymore, or it hasn't moved at all, or it's moving incrementally, and maybe we'll come back to it, but maybe we won't, because that's not the point. And so I think that the rendered sensible, I think we spend so much time trying to render things sensible, and the thing that we use to render something sensible is we say, who are those two people? How do they know each other? Oh, they know each other because they're siblings. Okay, they're siblings, and that we can tell that from the way they're talking to one another and the language they use. But Joyce removes all of that and says, good luck.
Yeah.
And the most fascinating thing is that it still hangs together.
Yeah, the fact that when Anna Livia showed up, it felt like an event.
Yeah.
Because it's like, oh yeah, he knows all these things about our perception of comprehension and literature, and then he can mess with them. But at the core of it, he's all like, yeah, I still know how to make this feel important.
Yeah, it's a really fascinating thing. I mean, we've read 8 chapters. Like I said, every single one has something to do with this family of 5. And then we have 3 whole. I think it's fascinating that chapters 1, 2, and 3. So we have chapter 1, which is Finnegan's Wake, but then chapter 2, 3, and 4 are the Humphreyad. Parts 1, 2, and 3, an academic study about the rumour mill obsessed with HCE, a continuing study of other outrages against HCE. The study continues describing more outrages.
Everyone's just talking mess for 3 chapters.
Yeah, but for 3 chapters, and just the fact, like, if you were an editor and someone gave you this book and then you said, so what's happening in chapter 2? Oh, we're going to hear all about the rumour mill obsessed with this one guy. Okay, that has to be chapter 2. This is... We need to do that then? Yes, we do. Well, what's the next chapter? Oh, we're going to continue it for 2 more chapters. And that choice, the hubris, the very hubris of Joyce to throw all this stuff out, not really allowing us to get our feet under us. Even the first chapter, like I said, where you have the relatively straightforward things, the touchstones where you can say, oh, this is the guy from the song. This is the Finnegan's Wake guy who fell off the roof and he woke up when they thought he was dead because of the liquor. Or this is the tip lady, I get her, but then getting into an academic study.
Yeah.
And fully aware that none of these chapter titles were written by Joyce himself. These were from scholars later. But yeah, I find it really... I mean, so now that we're so far in, comparing what you thought this would be to what this is. I mean, when we first started, I know that you went in blind because you're that kind of friend. I appreciate that. But what did you think we were getting into?
Yeah, I thought it was going to be... this is also a really bad analogy. I thought it was going to be like Beowulf in the way that, like, I'm reading Beowulf and I'm like, sure, something's happening. Great, cool. But I'm so lost in the sauce of the language that I don't care, you know? Right. And again, I might get lambasted in the comments for insulting Beowulf, but I just remember interacting with Beowulf and being like, I don't care.
Yeah.
Like, I don't care. So I was like, this is going to be full of language and manipulation of language to zero end.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You know? Or it's like reading Chaucer, where
it's a hard thing just to be hard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or it's so old that we've lost the tools to be able to interpret it cleanly. But once you get the tools in place, then you go, oh, Chaucer's telling jokes. This is fun, you know?
Yeah. And I think that, you know, I've come to appreciate it in the same way that I appreciate Playboy of the Western World, mm-hmm. where I'm like, oh, I love any book that causes any piece of art that causes an uproar in some way, shape, or form. I'm all about it. I mean, Rite of Spring is my favorite piece of classical music, not because it's my favorite piece to hear, but because people like
because of what happened after.
Yeah, I'm just like, give me that.
Absolutely, Uguruwa.
Yeah, and I'm like,
just see like see, they lasted one word into the play before they started tearing up the seats. Yeah,
which I
love it.
love,
Yeah.
and so I love that, but also I I'm really appreciating just like with I think that there's this misconception that like art in this time doesn't examine some of the same things that we're examining now,
Mm.
and like the I'm really surprised by the leaning into sexual proclivities that are in this book, and like the dirty jokes that are in this book,
Yeah.
and and there's this notion that like writers today or humor today is like, and I'm like, no, everyone has always liked these things, and they show up in literature literally all the time, and if for nothing else, I could go to a 19-year-old and be like, this means something dirty, and that might bring them into it,
Yeah.
which I also think is kind of fun. I mean, that's how I got brought into Shakespeare, to be completely
Yeah.
honest with you. Every time
Shakespeare's filthy.
I was like, this is an innuendo. This is great. But I really, I'm learning to appreciate that, and I'm learning um, to be excited whenever, like when Festy King showed back up again. I was like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
like I know, it's
Yeah.
being able to latch onto those things is really great.
Yeah. Yeah, I have a similar kind of feeling where I knew, I having read Ulysses and going, okay, well, I know that I know Joyce's style, or at least I thought I knew Joyce's style of going, it's going to be a weighty tome, it's going to be um, sophisticated and filled with references to mythology, and I'm pretty sure I can sort of follow along, and um, I knew that the language was much tougher. And having read the first, before we recorded, I recorded the first 15 pages just to sort of test to see whether it was worth doing. And just that process of going, whoa, this feels like something entirely different than anything I've done before. But I am really excited by the joy that I find in this, that there's joy, that Joyce is writing from this place of mischief, and he is happy to lay in those dirty jokes, and he is thinking of us as the reader. He is sort of giving us these little crumbs of things that are accessible amidst everything else. And I think we said a couple months ago now that sometimes it feels like reading a book in a lightning storm, and you see flashes and you have flashes of recognition of what you're seeing. And those sometimes are quite few and far between in some chapters. Some chapters you get in, like when you're going through the quiz and you're going, what is the quiz? Like, what is this question? This question has gone on for 12 pages. Or you get to the end of the 12 pages and you go, answer, Finn McCool. And you go, what? Oh, yeah, well, you were asking a question. Or the Shem the Penman chapter where the brothers are going back and forth at one another. And you have there are long periods where meaning is completely absent. And then the other thing is, and this is why I feel as though in a parallel alternate universe, and we're not going to do this in real life because who has the time, but I feel as though another version of this podcast, if we had a lot more time, would be you and I stopping each other at certain points during the reading and be like, oh, do you see that reference? Oh, I like this part. Let's just talk about this little moment here. Because you get things at different times to when I get things. And so things hit us in different ways. And we usually get to talk about those in the episode, which is always fun. But, I mean, there are certain kinds of characters that stand out to us, or certain kinds of chapters, or ones that where you get to the end and be like, that wasn't it for me. I didn't like that one, or this was a good chapter. I like this chapter. I don't know if anything stands out as characters or
the Musing
moments.
Room chapter is still so great. I know that's the first chapter, but then it was when Neil was reading with us, I believe. There's that section about the description of a woman jumping off the bridge into the river.
Yes.
Like, I was like, that's gorgeous.
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember what chapter that's in. I can't. But also, just like I'm a Festy King stan. I will forever be a Festy King stan. Just like the myth of this Festy King, I am.
Yeah.
here for.
So
and
that
then,
was
yeah.
Then Nuvoletta reflected for the last time in a little long life, and she made up all her myriads of drifting minds in one. She cancelled all her engagements. She climbed over the banisters. She gave a chilled, cloudy try. Nue, a light dress fluttered. She was gone, and into the river that had been a stream for 1,000 of tears that had gone on her and come on her, and she was stout and struck on dancing, and her muddied name was Mrs. Liffey. There fell a tear, a single tear, the loveliest of all tears.
What page is that? Sorry,
that's 159.
I was so far away from it in my book.
Yeah, that was actually the episode with Georgia.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Yes. I was like, someone read with us, but
yes.
I love that so much.
Well, and the thing that's really curious, like just that Nuvoletta section, makes me think of the Lady of Shalott. Like, you know, that very famous painting of the Lady of Shalott, which then comes from the myth of the cursed woman who was cursed to weave. Tennyson wrote the poem in the 19th century, and then it was turned into a painting by Waterhouse in the late 19th century. And that painting is the thing that I knew first. I think it was on a coaster or something in my parents' house. And you always knew this picture. But then going back and sort of unraveling the myth and going, oh, actually, that comes from Tennyson's poem. And, oh, actually, that comes from a myth about Lancelot and Camelot and all that kind of stuff. The idea of taking like that snapshot of that moment that Joyce has laid out and then expanding that moment out into an art of its own is so fascinating and so interesting.
And it's like every once in a while he's like, don't forget, like, no, for real, I can write, you know?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. What about you? What chapters stood out to you?
I really wanted to like Anna Livia more. I was really kind of looking forward to getting there, and because I knew what Joyce had staked on it, and I don't know if I got it yet. So I was really hoping for that. I mean, I feel as though that first chapter, to me, when we were just sort of finding our way in, felt the most exciting of all the chapters we've done so far, of finding that little pieces of meaning where by the end of the first couple of episodes we're like, oh, we kind of get it, or we see where he's going. And so I'm Museum Room stands out for me as well. I did like the section where HCE refuses service to the German tourist from his pub and then lists all of the mean names people have called him.
Oh yeah,
that. I mean, not least for the fact that Bridie read it, but it's a very fun thing when someone can say, you can't call me anything I haven't ever been called before, and here's a list of all of them. So I do like his lists. And then also I'm very fond of the Ballad of Percy Riley as well, when Meg sang that. That was nice.
That was nice.
Yeah, there's lots of humor in here. And I don't think there's anything wrong with finding humor in a funny-looking word or a portmanteau that is just kind of fun to roll off your tongue. I feel as though maybe the purists might look at us and say, you don't understand that reference, which is linking over here, and the wordplay here is mimicking this and that, and that's what makes it funny. I think the humor sometimes comes from people just like to hear a funny word, which is why Thunder words generally are very high. When anyone ever Instagrams Finnegan's Wake, a Thunder word is often involved, because that's a crazy thing. People look at it and go, whoa, look at that word. Or if I want to show someone something crazy from Finnegan's Wake,
you're like, hey,
check this word.
We haven't encountered a thunder word in a while.
It's been a while, hasn't it? Yeah, the storm is
I'm scared.
Which is interesting. We're a third of the way through, and if this is a night's sleep, we might say that we're at sort of maybe 3 or 4 in the morning. I don't know if anyone's ever tracked, if it's worth
the
tracking
time
in real time, of saying, okay, over the course of an 8 hours sleep, where does what come in? And again, that's probably taking it a little bit too literally. But yeah, it's been good. And our guest readers have been amazing.
Have been.
I've loved all of them. Everyone has, and we've been getting all these different perspectives from these different people who, some people know their stuff like Neil, and some people are completely bewildered by it, but are game to try. We got perspectives from professional directors. We've got perspectives from professional educators, children.
You know what my favorite part about it is?
Yeah.
that people that I admire and know are intelligent and I'm like are way smarter than me, when they struggle with these words, I'm like, oh, I'm good. you know, every once in a while, you just have to be like, good. It's not just me. Thank you
It's
so
the
much.
great equalizer.
Yeah.
Equalizes everyone except Neil, who sits on top of us all.
Oh no, I mean you read it as if it's in your veins too, but you know,
I still struggle. I still stumble. I'm always very aware of not being, as smooth as it could be. But yes, no, it's a really nice thing. And yeah, there are other versions of this out there, all the audiobooks and things like that are a little bit cleaner than how we do it. But that's okay. If you really want to read a clean version or you listen to a clean version of it, then the audiobook is for you. That's fine. One of those 27-hour recordings that we talked about early on.
Yeah.
But that's not for us.
I do still laugh to myself on page 41. He says yokels and the yotes.
Yeah.
Whenever I see someone, I can be slightly judgmental whenever I see somebody who's like wearing something outside that I'm like, that's for home, like these yokels and the yotes. So the more that Joyce is gonna slide into my repertoire more and more.
Yeah, and maybe we do need to write an adaptation of a section.
Of a section.
And maybe it's like a paragraph, and you go, okay, this is based on this paragraph from Finnegan's Wake, and then write that play. I think, yeah, so maybe I'm publicly throwing down the gauntlet here that you and I will write this play.
I was going to say, not just to me, I hope.
Yeah. I'll come out of playwriting exile, or retirement, or whatever. But
well, good.
Yeah, and we've got some good guests coming up. We have some more experts. We have some more amateurs. We love them all equally, and it's going to be fun. So chapter 2 or book 2 is where things start getting a little bit funky. I'm interested.
It hasn't been weird yet, y'all.
yeah, we haven't even got there. But I am interested to know. Like we keep coming back to the diagrams that are on the page, and there's also the annotations and the footnotes and things. I'm interested to know how screen readers handle that, just in terms of an accessibility piece on what, like, if someone's buying this book, but is it descriptive? Are we going to get to the diagram and say, okay, here there's a diagram of a triangle, and to the left there's a number 2, and the top there's a number 4. Is it descriptive like that, or? Yeah, I'm not sure. How it would be handled if, say, for example, in terms of document accessibility, what the edition would do.
Well, I can answer that for you because I can get the Kindle edition for free.
And
then I will wait until we get there because the Kindle does read to you.
Okay. Excellent. We have that to look forward to when we get to episode 2. And there are a few moments of sketches where Joyce, just draws some pictures and says, here you go, here's a picture. Interpret that. But that's all part of the fun, I think.
I just found a whole entire book about a book that says, let James Joyce jazz up your vocabulary. And it's all words from Finnegan's Wake.
Amazing. Of course.
That's 100% coming with me. Thank you so much.
And I'll also say, I've been saying that there are 3 books. There are 4 books in Finnegan's Wake. The last book is quite short. So I apologize to the purists who are busily writing letters of fury to me.
But we're over a third of the way done with the novel. So
we are over a third of the way done. Nearly 35% of the way through. So by the time we get to the end of the next couple of readings, we're coming up on half. So really, once you get there, there's the only thing that's going to stop us now is a cease and desist letter. And I don't think that's coming.
I was like, if it would have come by now.
I think so. So. Well, this has been among my favorite episodes we've ever done. It really makes me think, and again, who has time for this, but the way that we go back and forth and bounce off each other in terms of ideas, and this really replicates our dramaturgical process, where TJ
does.
and I, I'll say that we had, for a long time, we had this process called, what was it called? Art gallery dramaturgy?
Yeah.
where I would have a list. I would have my book. I have a notebook, and I'd have all my notes about TJ's latest play in there. And I would say, okay, we're going to take this notebook. And so we were walking around the National Portrait Gallery in Washington, D.C., and I had my notes, and we were looking at all the portraits and chatting away. And then every now and then I'd just like glance in my notebook and then hit him with a question. It's like, what do you think about the relationship between the doctor and the patient there?
And they'll be like, blah, 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 blah,
and then
blah,
TJ
blah.
would chat away. And I'm like, oh, that's cool. And then we'd get to the end of the gallery, and I'd be and he's like, oh, I've got so many ideas for my play now. Like, yeah, it's just how we work. And so so I feel as though the world probably does need us to have a dramaturgy podcast because we can talk the stuff that we talk and really sort of change the world. But for the time being, we are doing Wake, and I'm very happy to get to do it. But there's lots of time. There's lots of time. Yeah.
Don't worry, I'm gonna bring you back. You thought you could run. That's really cute.
I'm a one-man dramaturg. Like I only dramaturg one play right now. So, but it's TJ. But I also haven't dramaturged a bunch of TJ's more recent stuff because I don't have time. But I will come back. I promise. He keeps.
I have a comedy waiting just for you to tell me that it's broken.
Yeah, he keeps sending me links and saying, "Hey, I got the new draft up on Celtex, you should read it." And I go, yeah, good luck with that. And then I just don't. So I'm a bad dramaturg, but
you're the only one for me.
Yeah, that's what I like to hear. Well, that is all the time we have for Wake. Join us next week as we start in on book 2 as Shem, Shaun and Izzy get up to all kinds of nonsense. I've been Toby Malone, joined as ever by TJ Young, bidding farewell to book 1 and looking ahead to new challenges. See you next week, erudite listeners of impeccable taste. This has been Wake, a cold reading of James Joyce's Finnegan's Wake, just to hear it out loud. If you've made it this far, thank you for your dedication. Join us next week for another segment of Finnegan's Wake and a chat about what we've found. Wake is a Moon Street Media podcast, engineered by TJ Young and Toby Malone. Our theme song is The Ballad of Perso Riley, arranged and performed by Meg Logue after James Joyce. Wake is recorded in Canada, where Finnegan's Wake is in the public domain. For community and bonus content, join us at our free Patreon at patreon.com/wakepod. If you have questions about Finnegan's Wake, don't ask us. We're just as confused as you are. See you next week.